me know. Okay, so good morning. Welcome to this second week of classes. Hello. Can you see the slide, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So now in the last topic that has been taught by Professor Bhattacharya, you have been given an introduction to the concept of a modern computer. What this subject is all about, this computer organization and architecture subject, and brief history of how computers have evolved over the years. Now we will start with actual programming of a microprocessor, but this programming will not be in a high level language that you are familiar with. For example, C. We will start with something called assembly language programming, which is very close to the language that microprocessors understand. So you are also taking the compilers course. So you know a compiler converts a high level language to a form which is understandable by the microprocessor directly. So we will now study for a particular instruction set architecture or ISA, the language that a microprocessor understands. We will study something called the MIPS 32 instruction set architecture. So the instructions consist, I mean, they basically are the language of the computer. Okay, so different computers have different instruction sets. I think you have been exposed to that in your previous lectures, but they have many aspects in common because these ideas of how a microprocessor should work, that remains the same in most cases. Okay, and early computers had very simple instruction sets which simplified their implementation. However, as time have evolved, circuit design and implementation of these circuits on silicon into more and more complicated VLSI chips have become very common. That's why the instructions also have become quite complicated. Okay, for example, in modern microprocessors, you will find instructions which can perform even cryptographic operations, etc., which earlier was unthinkable. Okay, so the instruction set that we are going to study is reasonably simple. We are intentionally teaching a reasonably simple instruction set because this is your first exposure to instruction sets. But please understand that this is not the complete picture. There are much more complicated instruction sets available. However, the instruction set that we are going to teach or we are going to study in this course is complete in a sense that you can implement anything you want using this instruction set. Of course, you have to probably write more code and work hard, but it is possible. Okay, many modern computers also have simple instruction sets like this MIPS 32 that we are going to study. Okay, so you must have studied CISC and RISC architectures, complex instruction set and reduced instruction set architectures. Okay, computer, at least in this slide, is interchangeably used with a microprocessor. By a computer, we basically mean the microprocessor. Okay, so please remember that. Don't get confused by seeing a sentence like many modern computers also have simple instruction sets. You might get confused that what is a computer's instruction set? Is it different from the microprocessor instruction set? No. Here, by the term computer, we basically mean the microprocessor. MIPS is a commercially available technology. Okay, it's the name of a company actually. I think it was founded by maybe this Professor Hennessy, John Hennessy from Stanford, who either Hennessy or Patterson, one of them. I think it was John Hennessy. He started this company and it is still sold. Okay, it is sold in the embedded market, for example, in consumer electronics, network storage equipments, cameras, printers, etc. But of course, it is not a mainstream microprocessor for your PC. Okay, I mean, it is possible to have a MIPS 32 or MIPS 64 based PC, but you have to work a lot. I mean, because you have to port the operating system to that microprocessor. I believe Linux kernel has been ported to MIPS 32 and MIPS 64 also, but it will be a lot of work basically. So usually people use much higher end microprocessors which operate at much faster speed. For example, Intel or AMD microprocessors on their PCs and servers and workstations, but this is still used in the embedded market. Don't think that the embedded market is a niche market and it's a very minority market in the microprocessor domain. The embedded market actually is more than 90% of the total number of microprocessors sold every year. Okay, so many of these microprocessors are inside consumer electronic products, household products like say microwave ovens, refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, washing machines. Okay, you might be surprised to know that a modern car can contain 100 or more microprocessors or microcontrollers inside it. So if every car contains 100 microprocessors and microcontrollers, just imagine the amount of these embedded processors that are sold every year. Okay, how many laptops or desktops do you have? You won't have 100 laptops, right? So you have only one Intel microprocessor in one laptop that you have, whereas if your family has a car, that car has for 100 microprocessors, embedded processors. So the share is hugely in favor of this embedded market. Okay. The MIPS instruction set also, one of the reasons we are teaching it is typical of many modern ISS. Many modern instruction set architectures or ISS are modeled on this MIPS instruction set. Okay. So if you learn the MIPS instruction set and understand it properly, later on, if you try to learn other types of modern RISC instruction sets, for example, ARM, which is a very, very popular common RISC instruction set, you will have no problem understanding ARM. Okay, so MIPS is easier than ARM. It is easier to deal with. So we are we will start with this. There is also another RISC instruction set that has become popular called RISC-V. This RISC-V processor is an open source processor, which means that the entire design database has been open sourced and anybody can manufacture in silicon this microprocessor. Many companies do it, many universities have done it. If you have capability of doing a chip design based on the open source design, and then you have to get it fabricated or manufactured. Of course, that is a difficult task, and it takes a lot of money to get something into silicon manufactured, but it is possible. So this RISC-V has also become extremely popular worldwide. There is a Hennessy-Patterson version of your textbook based on MIPS-V, but unfortunately, it's not available in India. Means you have to get the US edition if you want to study that, and it's humongously expensive. That's why we are still teaching this MIPS 32. But maybe in future, maybe 5 years from now, the RISC-V version would become more mainstream. And at that point of time, maybe we'll shift to RISC-V. Now, let us start with the simple operations. These operations we will describe using English language type words. Okay, for example, add. Now later on you will find that this English language description is not the final story. Okay. I mean, if you consider each of these instructions like add, sub, etc., or anything else, there is a binary representation of this, which is uniquely identifies the operation that the microprocessor would want to perform. That binary representation is actually called the instruction. Okay. Now, don't think that this binary representation, this is also something peculiar that the beginning students think. They think that the ASCII representation of ADD is that binary representation. No, absolutely not. The binary representation is something unique, as we will study very soon, that microprocessor understands when it sees it and it finds the proper operands, it performs that operation, for example, add in this case, and stores the result somewhere. most of the instructions that we are going to study operates on two operands and stores the result in a third operand. Okay, most of them. So these are binary operators basically. Binary in a sense something that operates on two operands. But of course, there will be other types of operations also, many other types of operations also that we will study, which are not binary operations, but we will come to them slowly. So what does add A, B, C mean? In MIPS, the operand which is written on the left hand side of the list of operands, okay, that is the destination. So here A is the destination, B and C are the sources. Okay, so A gets B and C, A equal to B plus C in C terminology. That is what is happening here. Now, all arithmetic operations that MIPS has this simple form. Okay, it is fixed, and this regularity of having the same format for every arithmetic operation is very, very important. Okay, this makes the hardware implementation simple. This is one of the major philosophy of RISC microprocessors, and that's why it became popular in the 1980s, because this philosophy of making things simple, keeping things regular, this is not there necessarily in CISC type machines. If you look at the Intel x86 instruction set, it is mind-bogglingly complicated, irregular, and ugly. Okay, but MIPS is not like that. MIPS is extremely regular. It is easy to understand, and it is easy to implement. Remember one thing, that any circuit VLSI implementation becomes simpler if there is regularity in what you are trying to implement. If it is a regular structure, it becomes simpler to implement. Based on this philosophy, MIPS instruction set is built. What is the advantage if the implementation is simple? If the implementation is simple, higher performance at lower cost is possible. Higher performance means maybe your clock frequency that you can use, that is higher compared with at reasonably lower number of logic gates. You can use the circuit which runs at higher clock frequency. So this is one of the advantages of having a regular and simple structure. Now we have not mentioned anything about this A, B, C. What are these? Are these variables? Are these registers? Are these contents of memory? That is not very clear here. So we will slowly come to making it clear what are these destination and source operands. Okay, but let us still continue with more complicated expressions. For example, the C expression is F equal to G plus H minus I plus J. Okay, so this is a perfectly valid C expression. Now, one problem with MIPS is not a problem, just a feature of the instruction set is it will take exactly two source operands, operate on it, and not more than two. So in this case, if it was possible to take all four operands on the right hand side at a time, you could have computed directly F equal to G plus H minus I minus J. Unfortunately, that is not possible. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to first calculate G plus H, you have to then calculate I plus J, and G plus H result has to be stored in some temporary variable. Then you have to compute I plus J, store its another temporary variable, and then finally calculate the difference by a sub, this time a sub instruction. So this is quite logical. If you have a simple instruction set which takes only two operands at a time, this is how you proceed. So suppose you introduce two temporary variables T0 and T1, okay, and then you operate like this. Notice that T0 and T1 is at the first variable in the list of operands, so it is the destination, and then it proceeds. Finally, F gets their difference through a sub instruction. But again, notice intentionally it is not mentioned what is the nature of this T0, T1, G, H, F, I, J, etc. type of variables. Okay. Now, arithmetic instructions in MIPS use only register operands. By register operands, we mean inbuilt registers. Register, you know, is a collection of flip-flop. In MIPS processor, there are exactly 32-bit registers. A collection of registers in a processor is called a register file. This is a technical term, okay? Register file. There are 32-bit, each 32-bit registers inbuilt inside MIPS processor. Okay. These are used frequently for data operations and writing code. These 32 registers are numbered from 0 to 31. Okay. These registers names are start always with dollar, and the register simple naming convention is $0, $1, $2 up to $31. However, very few people, actually no person, writes these registers or refer to these registers as $0, $1. Instead, they use a symbolic naming convention that has become popular, which is used and understood by all MIPS assemblers. An assembler is a software which converts assembly language programs that we are going to see and we are going to write in English, I mean in text form, to the final binary form that can be executed by the microprocessor. Okay. So these assemblers actually use these symbolic names $T0, $T1, etc., and $S0, $S1, etc. Okay. Now let me project another document. This document I have already uploaded in a zipped folder on MIPS. It is called on Moodle. It is called the MIPS quick reference. Let me share it so that I can show you the naming conventions. Okay. So there are 32 general purpose registers. Register numbers are $0 to $31. These are the names, but there are some special registers, high and low. That will go. We will study later maybe. These are the register numbers. You do not need to memorize this. Okay. The register number and the alternative name, this list you don't need to memorize. Just note the second column, that is this alternative list, this column, and the highlighted ones, because these highlighted registers are the ones that we are going to use. There is one register which is $0. That register is fixed at 0. This register cannot be the destination of any other register. It is short-circuited to 0. Why they have wasted one register short-circuiting it to 0? Because the value 0 is extremely important in assembly language code that we write. It has innumerable uses and the value 0 is often required. If we did not have a register which is fixed at value 0, we would need to store the value 0 in some register and then do certain operations on it, which is going to use one more clock cycle in storing the value 0 on a register. To avoid this thing, one register they have dedicated with a hard-coded value 0. Okay. Then there is a $80. Well, $80, I think you don't need to bother too much. Maybe I could have avoided highlighting this because we will never use $80. It is used by the assembler only and not usable by the programmer. $V0 to V1, A0 to A3. $V0 V1 is it takes the values from different function calls. Okay. When the function call returns values, they return the value in registers V0 and V1. Then there are registers A0 to A3, and through which you pass on arguments to the function. So you can pass 4 arguments through 4 registers. If you want to pass more arguments, you have to pass it through memory in a roundabout way. Okay. There are some not preserved across procedure calls, preserved across procedure calls. These things are mentioned. Don't bother about it right now. When we study procedure and functions, we will discuss what it means by preserved and not preserved. Then there is this registers $T0 to $87. These are temporary registers. These are called temporary registers. Then there is $T8 and $T9, which are also temporary registers. So these 10 temporary registers. And then there are 8 saved registers, S0 to $S0 to $S7. So these 10 temporary registers and 8 saved registers, these 18 registers you will find is your primary workhorse. Okay. Most of your code will consist of using these 18 registers. Then another important register is the stack pointer, which is very useful when we study function calls and those type of programs. And there is also another register called $RA, or the return address register, that is also very useful for function calls. So for now, we will only bother, most of the examples in the slides will consist only of the registers T and S. So these 18 registers, 18 is a large number. Okay, I mean, you will find you actually don't need so many registers. I mean, you can survive with maybe 6 or 7 registers, but anyways, MIPS provides you 18, no problem. No harm in that. But the type of programs that we are going to write, we will survive fine with 18 registers. Okay. Now let me get back to the slide. So when MIPS was designed, there are the other types of microprocessors that were there in the market. Most of them had very few registers inside. For example, the x86 64 type of microprocessor still have very few usable registers inside. Okay. MIPS took a different philosophy. It said, I will provide relatively larger number of registers in my register file to make it easier to write programs and to make the life easier for compilers. Because if you do not have too many registers in your register file, and there are lots of variables in your programs, these variables have to be bound to the registers. In MIPS, no operation can happen directly with the content in memory. It has to be brought into the register and then the operation can happen. So it is good if you have many registers inside. So they tried to provide as many registers as possible. But then the question becomes, well, why stop at 32? Why don't have we millions of registers, say? Okay, then there will be no problem with memory, because accessing the memory is a bottleneck. This is called the von Neumann bottleneck of stored program computers. Von Neumann bottleneck is a bottleneck whereby the processor runs at a much faster speed, the memory runs at a smaller speed, and the communication between the processor and the memory bus, is also quite slow. So the processor needs to wait till it gets the necessary value from memory. Okay. Later on, when we study cache memory, we will study techniques to try to solve this problem. Excuse me, I have a call that I have to take. Just wait for a moment. Sorry. Yeah. So the problem is that okay. So this von Neumann bottleneck is important, and later on when we study this cache memory, you will find some technique to kind of partially resolve this bottleneck. This bottleneck cannot be fully resolved, but at least you can try through some design to do it. However, having millions of registers inside microprocessor is not possible because the microprocessor chip size is finite. Millions of registers would require space to hold millions of registers. That will make the microprocessor chip large. That will make the microprocessor chip extremely power hungry because registers are extremely power hungry circuit elements. Among all the types of memory elements like register, DRAM or main memory. DRAM is the main technology for main memory nowadays. DRAM, SRAM, registers, then non-volatile memory or flash memory. Or among all of these, registers consume the most amount of power. So it is not possible to have millions of registers also, although ideally we could have had millions of registers in my microprocessor and solve all the problems. But what we do is we rather have a main memory which is very large. It has millions of locations capable of holding many megabytes or nowadays even gigabytes of data, whereas the microprocessor still remains relatively small and it tries to solve the issues by having some on-chip memory called cache memory to solve the von Neumann bottleneck. The 32-bit data, okay, every register, remember, is 32-bit. Collection of 32 bits contiguous is called a word in this microprocessor terminology. So we say the word size used by this microprocessor is 32 bits. Okay. So every variable must be bound to a register. What variable will be bound to what register is decided by the compiler during compile time. Okay. Now, during compile time, if the compiler finds that there are, like, maybe I have 50 variables and I have only 25 usable registers, remaining 25 variables it will put on memory. This is called register spilling. So as if registers are overflowing and some data has to be kept in memory. Later on, they, as and when possible, they keep track of what registers values are being kept in memory and they swap in certain values from memory and swap out the existing register values to memory. Later on again they swap it in and they keep on exchanging this type of values from memory locations because you only have finite number of registers. If your number of variables is smaller than the number of registers available, which will be most of the times in the programs that we are going to write, we will have no issues. Okay, we will not need to do any type of register spilling and storing stuff into memory, etc. But compilers oftentimes need to do it, and you are taking the compilers course. Probably you will be taught algorithms to efficiently perform this type of register mapping, so that the need for register spilling is very rare. Means very rarely would you actually need to perform register spilling. Most of the times you can survive without performing any register spilling. Now, suppose the variables have been bound by the compilers. There are only 4 variables to the registers S0, S1, S2, S3 and S4. There are 5 variables. F is in S0. And G, H, I, J are in S1, S2, S3, S4. I should say $S1, $S2, $S3, $S4. So when you compile this code, something like the assembly language code that is produced is something like this. So G plus H goes to a temporary variable, temporary register T0. It could have been any other register also. and S1 and S2 are G and H. Okay. T1 gets S3 and S4, and S0 is the subtraction of T0. I mean T0 and T1. So T1 gets subtracted from T0 and the value is stored in S0. Each of these instructions, each of them take exactly 1 clock cycle to complete. So this also you should remember. Okay. So each instruction takes 1 clock cycle to complete. So this piece of code will execute in 3 clock cycles. Okay. Any question up to this point, students? Because I'm not hearing your voice. Hello, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Now, does it mean that we do not need memory because arithmetic operations work on these registers? No, we still need memory. They are useful for storing composite data like arrays, structures, dynamically allocated data, etc. Now, to apply the arithmetic operations, unfortunately, they cannot directly work on memory. Your memory is on a different chip. For example, in modern computers, the memory usually is a DRAM chip, which is put in a memory slot on the motherboard. This DRAM chip can be of any size, depending on how large chip you have bought. Typically nowadays in modern laptops, these are usually at least 4 gigabytes. There can be larger memory chips also, no issues. There can be multiple memory chips. There are multiple slots to insert these memory chips, and in that case you have a memory bank. In this memory bank there will be say four slots, and you have 4 DRAM chips. Each of them has 4 gigabytes of space, which means you have 16 gigabytes of total memory. This is possible. Okay. Now, to apply the arithmetic operations, what you have to do, you have to get the value from memory inside your microprocessor register, and then store the value after you have done the operation. For example, add or sub or anything back to memory if you want to store it back to memory. Okay. Then again you have to return it to memory location. Notice these two terms, load and store. Don't confuse between them. Memory to register data transfer is load. Register to memory data transfer is store. Do not confuse between them. Okay. Yeah, initially you might get a little confused, but you should remember this. Memory is byte addressable. This is also another feature. Although the word sizes are 4 bytes, that is 32 bits, each memory address, each memory location individually is addressed as one individual bytes. Okay, but the words are aligned in memory, so the addresses are always multiples of 4. So the addresses you will find are always 0, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, etc. What does it mean? It means if the word starting address is 0, then it contains byte number 0, 1, 2, and 3. These 4 bytes together constitute one word whose starting address is 0. So word address basically means the starting address of the entire word. Okay. Then the second word, if its starting address is 4, that means it contains the bytes 4, 5, 6, and 7. In this way, everything is 4 byte. These 4 byte chunks constitute each one. MIPS is big endian. That means the most significant byte is at the least address of a word. What this means is just the example I gave. Suppose you have word number, word address 0. Word address 0 means 0, 1, 2 and 3 together makes one word whose starting address is 0. Now the question is, well, what will be there at byte address 0 and what will be there at byte address 3? How will he arrange the data? Suppose I have a 32-bit integer. I have to store it in this memory location. How to store it? Okay. MIPS follows a scheme which is called big endian. In this, the MSB of this 32-bit number will be at location 0. Okay, the next byte will be at location 1. The next byte will be at location 2. The next byte will be at location 3. Now you might ask, well, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal, because if you do not follow the Indian convention, then there have been cases where there have been large mishaps, where large computer systems have failed because they wanted to port a code to a processor where the Indian system was different. Just this thing, that the MSB of the number will be stored at the lower address and the LSB will be stored at the higher address. This convention itself is not followed in many other microprocessors. For example, the Intel x86 type microprocessors, the ones you have in your laptop, they are little endian. In this, the LSB is stored at the least address. So address location 0, in the example I was giving, 0 with an word with addresses 0, 1, 2 and 3 with byte addresses, which is word address 0. There the LSB will be at byte address 0. Okay, so just the reverse convention. Okay. So please remember this. Sometimes this matters when you write code. Sometimes most of the times it does not matter, but sometimes it does matter. Your assembler takes care of arranging the numbers properly and storing them into memory, generating code which will store the numbers properly into memory, where this endianness convention will be respected. Okay. And the name big endian and little endian has come from a famous English novel called Gulliver's Travel, in which this traveler Gulliver went to this some strange country where there were fight between two tribes. One of them were big endian and the other was little endian. The fight was about when you break an egg. The egg has an asymmetric shape. One of the ends is larger and the other end is smaller. Which end to break first? So you want to break the egg. Which end will you break? Will you break the little end or will you break the larger end? Two of the tribes, one used to always break the big end and the other used to break the little end, and they used to fight about it. And there was no solution to this fight. So this is from that novel, actually this name has come, and this also exists in the microprocessor community. Now this slide is very important. This shows memory operands. Okay, and how does these things work? Suppose the C code is G equal to H plus 8th element of array A. Now you know A is the name of an array, but it is also the name of a pointer variable which contains the starting address of the array. In MIPS terminology, this type of starting addresses are called base addresses. Okay, so it is called the base address of array capital A. Suppose it is in register S3. How did I get the base address in register S3? Well, somebody stored it in S3 somehow. Maybe the assembler, maybe manually you stored it. Somebody, suppose you stored it in register S3. and G has been linked with register S1. H has been linked with register S2. With this, now you have to predict what will be the compiled MIPS code. Now here for the first time we see the use of an instruction called LW. LW is load word. Load you already know, as I mentioned, load is data transfer from register from memory to register. Okay, so as usual you have the destination register is first, it will come to AA8 will come to a destination register, say $T0. I have decided to first load the word in $T0. Notice that we have no operation that can directly work with the memory value. Okay, that we have already mentioned that only register and register operations are possible. So first I need to get the value from A8 into some register, and that register is say $T0. So I first execute LW $T0, comma 32 in bracket. What does this mean? This is a base register. This is called a relative addressing. We will study this in detail later on also. Relative addressing or base register relative addressing, whatever you say. What the hardware internally does is the address computation hardware inside internally does is it looks at the content of the base register S3. Suppose that is something. It looks at the this offset which is written outside this bracket 32, and it adds this offset with this base register value. Okay, it just adds it to obtain the absolute address of what you want to fetch from memory. Okay, to get the actual address. Okay, so this is called a relative addressing mode because all your addresses are relative with respect to the base register. You already know when from your knowledge of C programming that your C programming also internally the compiler performs this exactly the same calculation, right? So why did it suddenly the offset became 32? If you compile this code, you will find the offset 32. Why 32? 32 because the compiler knows that each integer probably is say 4 bytes. So everything is byte addressable, remember. So 4 into 8 is 32 bytes. So I must move 32 bytes from the starting address of the array. This is exactly the 8th element, 8th indexed element, that is the 9th element of the array, right? So you pass over 32 bytes, you will reach the 8th indexed element of the array. So after that, once you quite easy to understand, only that this syntax of the LW instruction you have to remember. Notice that the LW instruction has only 2 operands. One is the destination register where the value from register will come, value from memory will be come and stored, and the other is this offset and combination of offset and base register, that effective address will be calculated internally by the hardware. And once you have the value in $T0, after that it is easy. You just add it with H is in S2 and store it in S1. Okay, using an add instruction. So again, it takes 2 instructions. In the simulator that we are going to use, it will seem that the LW instruction will also execute in 1 clock cycle. At least, I mean, the simulator won't give you any idea of how many clock cycles will it take to execute the LW instruction. However, if you had directly memory connected with your microprocessor and without any cache memory, then the LW instruction, just to execute it, it would take at least 100 clock cycles. So for 100 clock cycles, your microprocessor will wait just because the LW instruction is executing. So although once the operands are in register, internal registers, they are guaranteed to execute in 1 clock cycle. But if one of the operands is in memory, then there is no guarantee that it will get executed in 1 clock cycle. In fact, it can be worse. Okay, so I mean worse than 100 cycles also. Basically, 100 cycles is kind of minimum. So we will not bother about how many cycles it will take to execute this type of estimations, because that estimation is very difficult currently to do with your whatever we have studied till now. Towards the end of the course, probably we will be in a position to predict certain numeric, like we will be able in a position to predict how many actual clock cycles will it take to execute this code. But that will require considerable understanding of pipelining and cache memory, which we later on when we study will get an idea. Any question on this memory operation example? Students, any question?
No, sir.
Fine.
Sir, when we declare some array, then some part of the array is stored in the memory, and the part that we need is loaded on the register, because with 32-bit register we cannot have length
Right,
and arcs.
exactly. So exactly correct. The entire array is in memory, okay? And whenever we need one element of an array, we fetch it from the memory to the register and operate on it. If you want to walk through the array and fetch every element, then you have to write a loop which will go over every element of the array, fetch it one by one, store it in register, operate on it, then again go to the next element, etc. We will see such examples in the next classes. Yeah, but your concern is correct that the entire array cannot be brought into memory. Nobody tries to bring the entire array into memory. That is into register file. It is not possible because you don't know a priori what is the length of the array. Say in C programming language, usually, of course, you can define your own data structure and do some extra additional operations, maybe to figure out what is the length of an array. But classically, C programming language does not have any anything to indicate the length of an array, which is quite surprising. I mean, it is one of the bad features of the C programming language, that you are or if I mean most of you probably know Python or things as programming languages like that. You have a list, okay? You don't know what is the length of the list. That is an unbelievably bad restriction actually. Okay, so C has it. In string type arrays for null terminated strings, indirectly there are library functions which walk over the string and from the null character finds out what is the length of the array and return it, which is a roundabout way of doing it. Again, the question is, why do I need to do a library function call to know the length of a string? And especially well, I'm ready to do a library function call, but at least that value should be stored somewhere along with the data structure. So there should be a composite data structure which should contain the length of the string. That is not there. You need to walk over the string and then with that logic that, well, the last element is a null terminated null character, from that you return the. So this is all nonsense, but anyways, what to do? You have to live with it. Later on in these slides, we will see examples of string processing written in MIPS, where you have been told that there is a null terminated string stored in memory somewhere and you operate over it. Okay, So you basically do exactly the same thing. You start at the starting address. You will be provided the starting address of the array. Then you walk over the array till you get a null character. You do something. Fine. The next example in memory is a combination of load and store. Okay, so this is more interesting. Here now you have the destination also to be another array location. Destination is not a scalar variable. Okay, I mean it is a scalar variable, but it's inside an array. So in that case, you need something called an SW instruction or store word instruction to perform the store. The first two lines are exactly the same. You fetch the value using an LW instruction into T0. You add T0 with H is in S2 and then get the value in T0 itself. You override basically T0 value, no issues. And then you need to store the T0 value. Store is registered to memory. How do you store it? Well, you calculate the offset. The offset here is 12 multiplied by 4. Because each integer, this is probably integer, that's why it's 4 bytes. 12 into 4 is 48. So you write the offset dollar is 3 and you write T0 and then the value from T0 goes and gets stored at the location whose address is calculated as the content of S3 plus 48. Okay. Do you have any observation about the format of SW which is different from the format of other instructions we have studied till now?
The destination is in the second position.
Very good, very good. SW is the only instruction that I know of in MIPS whose source is on the left hand side of the list of operands and the destination is on the right hand side. All other instructions, and there are I think there are other store type instructions also which have SW is the store word. There are also store instructions which can fetch 1 byte or 2 bytes, store byte or store half word, this type of instructions. They also have this feature. I shouldn't say SW is the only instruction, but the store type instructions have an important difference in format from the other types of instructions. In the store type instructions, the destination is on the right hand side and the source is on the left hand side. Please remember this. Don't mess it up. It is difficult to mess it up because if you write the destination on the left hand side and the source on the right hand side, I think it won't. It will give an during assembly. You will assembling it. You will get an error probably. It's a syntax error basically. So, anyways, remember this and let us continue from tomorrow with the next topic, which is immediate type instructions. Okay, thank you. I'll stop the recording now. For those of you who are in the lab, I am getting different emails regarding issues about the network issues and connectivity issues and giving access to the lab. These are handled by the hardware lab staff. This is not in our hand. Regarding questions about the lab assignment, I am trying to reply. Either me or the other teachers, lab teachers, are trying to reply to those emails as we get them. But regarding the access part, I think by today evening you will be given, most of you will be given access, those who have requested access, and the lab technicians would also upload on Teams a video of usage of ISE, a tutorial video. Okay, and don't worry about the deadline. The deadline, if needed, we will extend it. Right now it is midnight or something. That is not a problem. That we can extend if we need it. Okay. There is another set of slides on Verilog. Very detailed set of slides uploaded on Moodle. Also have a look at it. Okay. Thank you.